You have a lot of opaque news when it comes to Evergrande. Excuse me, I dropped my pen. But yes, and then there's a Fantasia default. I'm just wondering, do you think that there is signs of this contagion risk from Evergrande is now spreading now across the sector?
I think the impact of Evergrande was mostly felt in July and August, mainly in the bond market and the refinance capability. And the background of why these companies are coming into liquidity squeeze issue was because the free red lines which came into place, and to curb them from continuing to leverage, which they have done so over the last cycle and since 2018. So when the government is now trying to stop them from continuing to leverage up from here, they have to use up the cash and also to rely on the internal sales. But the sales are also coming down quickly since July. And this time around, we are seeing the mortgage quota drying up more quickly than before. And because of all these reasons, we found that in this industry, they are under more pressure than previous cycles, than the market itself. And Evergrande may not be one single out situation. And we have already seen Cynic and Fantasia also coming into a similar situation, mainly because they have used up the cash to trying to deleverage and then turning out them into more liquidity situation.
Are there going to be, well, I think that's probably not the question, that there might be more companies here because of refinancing channels disappearing, if you will. But can we still be confident that despite that being the expectation that the structural issues or integrity of the Chinese property sector will remain intact?
We think first of all, we have to understand the policies this time around is still mainly cyclical in nature. We are not talking about a lot of structural changes, except for the implementation of free red lines. Banks are really facing some pressure from the regulators to limit the exposure on property. But the measures that we have seen so far, they are like things that we have already seen in over previous cycles. They are mostly administrative measures like mortgage quota, price caps, etc., home purchase restrictions. These are things that if they want to relax or reverse, it's actually very easy.
But they're happening at the same time, though, is the other question. And financing costs are at 14% for some of the weaker parts of the developers. I mean, who can afford to pay 14% anyway? So I guess my question is, how is this time different from the previous episodes where we did get some challenges within the sector?
Well, I have to admit the fact that this time around, developers are under more challenges than previous cycles. Okay. The most recent being 2018, which we have seen similar situation where a lot of funding channels were closed at that time, but then the mortgage market, the mortgage quota was still open until around August or late September. Right. So this time around, we may see things getting a little bit more stressful, and developers have already been more leverage than before, plus their margins are also lower. So with less margins, which means that they have to sell more or to earn the excess cash flow to reduce the debt. But then overall speaking, we think that the government actually have a lot of leeway to control or adjust their policies if they need. And it's not uncommon that we have seen in previous cycles that they have kept, readjusting, reversing the policy as and when needed.
Is that setting the wrong message, though? I mean, they did this whole campaign on red lines, and then if they start to ease, I mean, is it going to be more of a fine-tuning, you think? Or the fact that they're saying they want a healthy market? There was some speculation last week that they might actually do some kind of relaxation. What's your take on that?
First of all, we think that even at this stage, the China property market, the high-tier cities and the low-tier cities, the performance are still very different. Mainly, we see the pressure, especially the buyer confidence, which are hammered by the Evergrande's concern, whether they can turn key or not. These are more felt in the low-tier cities, instead, whereas it's not really so much to do with the high-tier cities, especially Shanghai, Beijing, for example. So we are seeing that the government aims at the stability in the property market, which is like always highly mentioned over last cycles or two. we think that with this in place, then this will be the policies that would be implemented or adjusted will mainly will depend on the stability issue. And usually when housing price expectation by the people, they swing from one extreme to the other, then the policy would tend to change as well.
To correct the other, the other extreme. So put everything together for us, because a lot of these stocks are trading relatively cheap relative to historical valuation. What are your expectations on sales or EPS or both, and housing prices in general? Do you see all three coming down modestly?
I think overall speaking, because if we look at the National Bureau of Statistics data, we expect the high-tier cities sales to be higher than the low-tier cities. So overall, the ASP may be flat or like slightly softened from now until the end of the year. In terms of the sales, we are expecting the sales to be 15 to 18% lower year on year in the next few months. We may be wrong, but then we are also seeing like whether there will be some policy adjustments from now until end of the year, which is also possible. And finally, we are talking about because of the margin squeeze and also the margin pressure and also the lower sales, we have already expected the developers' sales to miss their target by 5 to 10%. And adding all this together, maybe the next 2 years we may see the earnings risk of around 11 to 20 something percent based on our current assumptions.